All right. Hey, good evening, LinkedIn. Dave Wilson, the Ring of Hire Show. Hey, listen, great show tonight. I love it. You know, a good friend here, Paul, is Paul Falcone, author of Leading Through Crisis. We got a great show tonight for you. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, Dave. I'm fine. How about you?
Good, doing really good. And everybody knows the drill. We'll be right back after this video. I wasn't sure if you saw my new video.
You've got the coolest video like on the planet. There is nothing cooler than that video, Dave. That's unbelievable.
You know, the guy that I did it with, I had all the words when I saw it, that what he did.
Yeah.
He really did. When you know somebody really well, he knows what you were trying to do, but he really put it all together at the end with you're hired, you're fired, and every single word and everything that we've always talked about is in that video, you know?
Yeah, it's so exciting too. It's like, wow, I can't wait to watch what they're going to say.
I love it.
That's
hey,
cool.
Listen, I'll tell you what, everybody, you know, I always appreciate Paul coming on. I met him a couple years ago and a lot of his books. And I want to tell you how many books that I like. Now, you'll like this, Paul. All right, first one. This is a great book, and you can catch Paul on LinkedIn. This one was called Effective Hiring. I like this one for the interview, offer, and onboarding. That was a little mini series that you did. This one, 2,600 phases of effective performance reviews. That was another good one here. I love this one. You have, I believe, one or two others, something similar to this.
Yeah, there's one other, and it's called 2,600 Phrases for Setting Effective Performance Goals. So they're kind of like sister books, Dave. One looking back, one looking forward. So
you can do that. Oh, it's awesome. This is my favorite one, everybody, and you can tell I think I got so many things in this. Were the 96 great interview questions. What I like about this one is I like, Paul, how you've always you explain it in like 2 or 3 different ways. You know, like different scenarios. What you want to hear somebody say, like when you ask a question, what do you really want out of it? And I like how you did that. You can tell I like Paul's books. This one was another great one.
Yeah.
I love it. This one, 101 tough conversations to have with employees. This one, I felt like I told you, like always, I was living back in the 90s. That one. This one, 75 ways for managers to hire, develop, and keep employees by Paul. This is another great one that if you just want to get. We're getting there. Hiring and firing. This one was a good one. I like this one that you did. You really, I like how you put everything together on there of like just, I don't know, going behind the scenes of it kind of like, and I learned a lot by reading this one. And then the last one that I have, this was you must have spent a lot of time on this one, Paul.
That one took a lot of time, Dave. Yes, that one gave me a lot of gray hair. I'm not going to lie.
That one did. And the reason why we're here tonight, geez, I got enough room here, Paul. I think I got it all.
Keep going. Don't let me stop you. I've been, you know, it's like, Dave, I could listen to you being podcasted about my books all day long. It's amazing.
I know, right? But you know what it is? And this one I like that we're going to talk about tonight, the first-time manager leading through crisis. And, you know, just when I think you did it again. You know, you put so much work and so many and things that we're going to go over here and all these chapters. You put out a lot of information.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not that creative. People say, where do you get all the content for your books? And I always say, it finds me. You know, when you're in human resources, and I've been doing it for 3 decades, until about 2 years ago when I moved out on my own. Now I'm consulting. But it's true that the content just kind of finds you. And every time you think you've seen it all, and you're like, wait, he did what? there's still that moment, and there's a lot of teaching that goes on in that. There's a lot of things that people can learn from that in general. So when you're in management, I've always tried to write the books on the how. I mean, they know what to do. People just don't know how to do it, or how to open that conversation, or how to approach a challenge. So that's kind of been the little niche that I've been able to fill.
For that, well, I mean, a lot of this, I guarantee, is experience too. And like you said, you've always said that you're always learning, no matter what. You're always learning also. But this has got to be a lot of experience, because we're going to go over some of the stuff in the book. And I mean, a lot of it, I could tell it was from you, and you've been through everything in this.
What's interesting to me, Dave, was, so for the last 5 years, my last full-time job was 2017 to 2022.
Right.
And I was the CHRO of what's known as the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is basically the retirement home for the folks in the entertainment industry.
Right.
And we went through COVID together. And it was really, really hard to think of heading up HR in a retirement home, because they were so vulnerable. I mean, COVID came on the scene in a retirement facility up in Seattle, if you remember that. But at the same time, it was almost like making lemonade out of the lemons. There was so much that we learned through that process. That was the primary driver for me to do the book. But of course, a lot of the book isn't on COVID. 10%, not 5% of it may be on how to deal with these natural disasters, or large scale community events like that. But the rest of the book is a little bit more hands-on, practical, in the trenches kind of stuff. That's
some, I wanted to, Rob, I do see you. So Rob's on there. I believe this is Rob on LinkedIn. I hit this, but I also wanted to give you a plug here, Paul, and if you want, I have it right here. This is and I have it on order. I get it May 20, I think it's May 21st. And that is, I know I have it here. I got to find it. It's under overlay, but this, if you download it, here it is. This one, right, if I can find it, right there. Come on, what is it doing there? There we go. Oh, I don't know what's going on here. Let me see.
I know what it's going to be. So there you go. Look at that.
The First Time Manager. Do you want to talk about what that one? Because this one's a little bit different than your writings, right?
Yeah, it is. It's the first real book. It's the first time I've written a book strictly for an HR audience. And the funny thing is, it was kind of weird. All my other books, because this is number 17 for me that's coming out in May, my other books are all written for a general management audience. No matter what you do in business or a small business owner, those books apply. This one was really kind of targeted. And so HarperCollins, the publisher, said, Paul, there's this book called The First Time Manager that we have that's been out since the 80s. And we want to build an umbrella under it. Would you write the HR one? And I said, I'd love to. And they said, well, before you write that one, though, we want you to write one that could pair with all the others. So if someone picks up The First Time Manager Sales or whatever, what other book could it be? Could you think about that? And I said, I don't need to think about it. It's Leading Through Crisis and Disruption, because we're all feeling that way these days. It's like building a plane while we're flying it. We're exhausted. So that's how that book came out that's in your hand. But then about 6 months later, I had the deliverable for The First Time Manager HR. So that one comes out.
So is that going to be for like smaller, anybody that has a business, or that book there, that'll be really good for?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. Well, it's anyone who's kind of been, either you're thinking of getting into management in HR, or you've been in that management role for the last 3-4 years, where you want to kind of go back and get a stronger foundation. That's what that book is for. But it's also for small business owners who either don't have an HR person and they want to know what HR can do, or they're thinking about creating a role for an HR person, but they want to get a better feel for what it's all about. So it kind of serves those audiences, but it's more specific and more targeted than most of the other books I've written.
And that comes out, I believe I said it comes out May 21st. I get it.
May 21st. I'm so honored that you'll be on that list. You'll be one of the first ones to receive it. So thank you.
I got that one on there ready to go. I wanted to really go right into the book here. And I like the name of it, The First Time Managers Leading Through Crisis. But for someone, even myself, I told you, even being in the 90s, I was thinking today about sexual harassment when Anita Hill, when all that came out,
Sure.
That's where all of a sudden our work changed. When I was a young supervisor in the paper industry, we had sexual harassment, never heard about it. And all these things that even you have in the book here, I look back now, I don't believe we didn't have the training that we do now. I mean, I look at this and say, what would I have done with this? It really would have helped me a lot out. And I would really love to have given this to a couple of bosses of mine, say here, but I mean, the difference, you talked about the difference of how things were then and how they are now and how different it is.
Yeah, and the funny thing with that topic, the chapter that I wrote on that was really to give a manager a script to
Right.
talk with the team and say, you guys, I know all the policies and the procedures and what's in the code of conduct, blah, blah. I want to talk beyond that. I want to talk soul to soul, so to speak. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. Let's talk about what our values are as a team. And let's talk about how we choose to deal with each other in terms of respect and trust and having one another's backs and what it's really going to look like and feel like for us on a day-to-day basis. And the whole idea is, again, what I say, Dave, is like people know what to do. You're not supposed to have sexual harassment. Or
Right.
they go to the training and they say there are two kinds of sexual harassment, quid pro quo and hostile work environment. It goes in one ear and it's out the other.
Together.
The reality is, how do you talk to your team about it so that it
Right.
never shows its ugly head, so to speak? And that's really going to come from respect for one another. And when you set those guidelines, and it's called values-based leadership. I'm putting my values out there, and the problems never materialize because everyone knows what's expected of them and they kind of do it. And it's that easy. It's a lot easier than we make it, so many of these things.
It is. And then I always would be like curious how, I keep saying how somebody my age now, I'm not that old, but I still look at this, compare it to what I would have done differently. And I think it really all comes down again, like you said, I was in a union environment. I was young. It was tough. It was hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I was nervous, and my stomach, I'd always be like, what the hell am I going to say? But I didn't have anybody to ask. I really didn't. Nobody would have known.
Yeah. And so the funny thing is, the way I usually write my books is to say, look, let me be your mentor and let me be your career,
Right.
your guidance counselor, so to speak, let me be the mentor and coach. Because especially with Gen Z, the younger gen, the 25 and under crowd, they need that kind of mentorship. We all did, but these are the ones who are coming out of, the COVID lockdown and everything else. And I think if you can kind of give it that tone of voice that says, listen, it's a handy guide and a guiding hand, but let me explain it in my terms so that you can interpret it the way you need it. I think if it's a friendly voice and it doesn't sound like a text manual and it doesn't have a million little footnotes, I don't do that. I just write from the heart. I think that makes a big difference. I think it's just a little bit more relevant for people.
It does. You can tell the experience here. I'm thinking, man, he's been through a lot. I said, God, he's been through a lot. I want to, when we said about leading through crisis, the thing about it is if people could understand just by picking this up, or any type of books like this, but this one here is what you get out of it. Like I've learned some of these things that we're going to talk about. I like about cause and effect. It really comes down to if you don't say the right thing, how it turns around on you. And you're always, again, you get that gut feeling like, oh, did I say the right thing? You don't know sometimes. And then you didn't have anybody to talk to as you do now. And I feel like if everybody's not on the same page, that's what I mean, that communication that you can learn.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. So even where I'm focusing my management or my consulting space is in the management training and getting the senior executives and the frontline operational leaders aligned, because they've got to be on the same page with this stuff. So you can give them the tools. And the bottom line is you can reset those expectations for everybody. It's not as hard as we make it, but you've got to make it. I've always said like iron hand with a velvet glove. I mean, I'm a really nice guy, but I have high expectations. You can do both. And even when I've been in situations where, knock on wood, you have to terminate people or lay off people, you still do it with care. Yeah. The funny thing is, you don't do it Friday afternoon at 4:45. You do it early in the day and early in the week so that you're accessible if they need you. And what I've always said is when you let people go, do it with kindness. Tell them, look, I'm sorry it's come down to this. We have to move in this direction, but listen, I'm here for you. If you need help with your unemployment application or your COBRA, right? Or, you want to practice your interview, just make me your concierge. I'll do that for you. I'll always take your call. I'll always prioritize it. People can heal from that. They can walk away saying, I don't like the fact that I was terminated or I was laid off, but boy, they were cool about it. And I really appreciate that. That's what makes the difference. And that's why I say this is easier than we make it, because a lot of times we tell ourselves these narratives that are silly. Don't recognize people and say they're doing a good job. They'll want more money. It'll go to their heads. That's
the truth.
Right? It's like, come on, I would want to be recognized. I wouldn't want my boss to call me out in front of everyone and say, hey, Falcone, you did a great job.
I think they do.
Most people would. Right.
I think they like that.
You just have to work through that noise. There's a lot of that noise about I'm a manager now, so they have to be afraid of me. No, they don't. They don't have to be afraid of you, and you don't have to be afraid of anyone else. That's not what the workplace is all about. So.
And I like how you put that in there, and you have that in there about talking about helping them. I don't think people really even think about doing that, about, your benefits, because that's the first thing people start thinking about. And you can have all this information for them. Again, the person's not going to be happy. And I always feel like I've had people before, some people enjoy firing people. And there's something wrong with that. If you enjoy it, I think there's something wrong, because listen, even now, if I have to terminate somebody, listen, I think it's normal. The night before, I'm like, oh my God, it's a hard pill.
Yeah.
And if to keep the wording right, because you need to keep it short, kind of. And I've been there on both sides of it. And I'm like, wow, I like how, like, I've learned just by other managers, the way I listen to them, because I'm like, wow, I never would have said something like that.
And the funny thing is, Dave, so much of the relationship is emotional.
Right.
We try and make it all cognitive, so to speak. It's all brain based. It's not. When someone talks about who's the best boss they've ever had, it's an emotional tie, an emotional connection. When they say things like, I love working for Paul Falcone because he challenged me to do things I didn't even think I was ready for, or he seemed to have more faith in me than I had in myself at that point in my career. It's Maya Angelou who said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, made them feel. Yep.
And when you think about how do you build those kinds of relationships, how do you become a really trusted leader, someone who knows how to turn around teams and all that stuff? There's an emotional answer to that. It's not all cognitive. Just because you're good as a technician does not mean that people are going to look at you and say you're the best boss they've ever had. So it's a good litmus test to use. Do
you feel that some company, and I guess some of the smaller companies, listen, they might not have the tools to do it, but some of the, like, what I like about this book, First Time Managers, is I believe that managers, everything, just because you make them a boss, they need training. I would have needed training. I wish they would have had more, types of training like this. Now, I do a lot of self-reading, so that really helps here, because you can just learn a lot from, your background and your books here. But I feel sometimes the companies will cut people short and not do that. And I'm thinking, just because they just got promoted, especially in the beginning, I think that is where you need to work with that leader. And these books really do it.
That's all. You hit the nail on the head. And the training isn't happening out there, or at least if it is training, it's video training. It teaches them what to do, or it teaches them the what of the issue, but it doesn't teach them the how.
Right.
So it says, you should motivate your employees. It's like, well, what does that mean? What's someone supposed to do with that? And the interesting thing for me, Dave, when I started my consulting firm, it was the summer of 2022.
Right.
And part of it was I was the gray resignation, right? After going through the COVID, I was exhausted. I wanted to do something different. Life was too short. So I stepped out. I didn't stay in the corporate role. I decided I want to launch my own consulting firm, and I hope I can work till I'm 90, because I love doing what I do. But I also knew that companies would be feeling like they want to do something for their employees in general, but for their leaders in particular, because it was so hard for the managers. And let's face it, they were treading water career-wise for 2 years, lucky to stay alive. And the bottom line is, now is going to be the time to invest in them. And that's exactly what happened. I've been busy as a consultant because so many companies out there are trying to build that muscle. They're trying to, from a career and professional development standpoint, give people tools that they can use to make them stronger at what they do. It turned out to be really good timing on my part. I was really lucky. So actually, it was my wife's idea. I wasn't that lucky. She was just smart. But I married up, so we're good. But, that was kind of the idea behind the timing, and hitting them, to your point, when they're new at this, when they're afraid of it, so to speak, because it's so like, ugh. The reality becomes that's when you can give them the biggest gift, and that's when they can practice this and learn it.
Well, like, even from what I've learned from your books here is, I mean, you're an expert, you've been in that field. I feel like the managers that you put in here is, listen, you need to be able to they need to know the HR word. So general, it's all over the place, but they need some of this training, because if they don't have this, that's where the HR comes in. And before you know it, there's a lot of different things that people you can learn a lot from it to prevent the problems that you're going to have.
Right. And, look at the issues that we have today: employee burnout, mediating employee disputes, people's, their wires are exposed. There's so much going on, whether you're looking at politics or whether you're looking at weather and weather conditions, or you're looking at, there's so much out there. They can't leave that on the doorstep when they walk in the morning. So the question is, how do you incorporate that? How do you make it safe? And the question I always recommend that managers ask their people is, are you able to do your very best work every day with peace of mind? That's the question. Are you able to do your very best work every day with peace of mind? You'll be surprised what you hear. But the reality is people will say, well, you know what, Dave, I wouldn't say this, but okay, if you're asking, and you can really find out how they're doing. And then the ones who are saying, yes, I can, I'm hitting it on all cylinders. I'm at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. I love it here. Great. That's just another confirmation that you're doing things the right way. But it's hard these days. There's so much external noise. It's a particularly, at least for me in my 3.5 decades of work experience now, this is the hardest I've ever seen it. So
on that parts. I like in here, let me see, I got here, managers can do this. All right. You discuss hard conversations, but it says about rainmakers, how you talked about rainmakers, about you drew the circle, you put performance, conduct, and the employees, how you're responsible for performance and conduct, but the rainmakers, that was interesting how you said that.
Well, the funny thing too is when you have the rainmakers, the person who top biller in the branch, right? Salesperson, their performance is stellar, but their conduct is a problem. People, from a behavior standpoint, they're kind of toxic. People avoid them. They're problematic. They create all this drama. You draw the circle on a piece of paper with them and you cut it in half. And then the top half, you say, Dave, let me share with you what I'm doing here. In the top half, I'm writing the word performance. And in the bottom half of the circle, I'm writing the word conduct. But I have to hold you accountable for both.
For both.
Right now, you're knocking it out of the park on the performance side, but the conduct is problematic. And listen, the most important decisions in your career are going to be made when you're not in the room. That's the same for me as it is for everyone else. Let me help you with something that may be missing awareness that could hold you back when you're not in that proverbial room sometime in the future to defend yourself, because this could be good for your career and professional development. Do I have your permission to tell you? And they'll sit back and they'll say, sure, what's going on? But they're listening now because you've couched it in the sense of it's in their best interest. I'm not judging them. You always do that. You never do that. There's none of that moral finger being pointed at them, making them feel like they're children being admonished by a teacher. It's like, look, this is missing awareness. Let me be there to help. If I can make you as strong in the bottom half of this circle as you are in the top, your career goes nowhere but up. But the reality is, if you're not strong enough in the bottom half of the circle, you're really probably not going to progress much higher than where you are right now.
Because I like how you put in there.
I'm a good people builder. So I'm sorry, Dave. Yeah.
No, it's okay. No, I like how you put it. I put love it here. I like what got you here won't get you there. I had to read that a couple of times. Like, what got you here won't get you there. So as a leader, that's telling me, if I have that person that's top, well, I can't touch this person. You're nervous, you're afraid as a first-time supervisor or manager. I like how you said that. What got you here won't get you there.
That's actually a book title, by the way, from Marshall Goldsmith. It's a great book. The reality to me is it's like, I've had people who think you can't touch me because I'm the top salesperson.
Right.
I've had people who've said, you know what, I've been here 30 years. I have ties older than most of the people in this department. No one could touch me. I've had people who came to me and was like, yeah, Paul, if you have a problem with it, why don't you tell my mom? She's the CEO.
Yep.
All of this drama, that circle fixes it. You draw that circle, they get it. I don't know why it's so magical. It shouldn't be, but for some reason, people can hold it in their understanding, Dave. And it works well. It works well. When you tell someone, look, I know you're the top sales producer in the branch, but if I had to give you a performance review right now, you'd only be partially meeting expectations. But performance reviews aren't for another 9 months. And I want to work on this with you now so that when you get to that annual performance review, you're going to be as strong in the bottom half as you are in the top half if you'll allow me to be your coach and your mentor. I'll make it safe for you. I'll have your back. That being said, if you don't want me to be your career and mentor, I'm okay with that too, but I'm still going to have the same expectations going forward.
Still going to have the same. And that I love that part because it talks about the progressive disciplinary action the same way. Just because they've been there for so long or doesn't, you cannot kick it down. You have to confront the issue. And that's something that I've learned. Oh my God, I didn't like that when I was younger with it. It just tore me up inside because I didn't know how to. This person was there for 20, 30 years. Oh my God, man. He would, in the union, they would tear you up, boy. They would just sit there and you had your union reps and you're sitting there by yourself. And I only had myself. And I was like, oh my God, I'm 23 years old out of the military. And I'm trying to deal with 4 people of a guy that, you written him up for safety. And so he got hurt and he did it wrong. It was wrong. He knows it was wrong, but you had to write the person up. But yet the whole meeting would just be nothing but arguing and turn around. Everybody was just angry all the time.
Yeah, it's very confrontational. And so you bring up unions. The funny thing is now, again, this is not pro or negative union,
Right.
but I'm just saying one of the things, or three of the chapters in the book are on what happens if your company is going through an organizing campaign, or you find out your employees are meeting with the union tonight at the local pizzeria.
Right.
What do I do? You've got to, look, a company is not going to want to go union. However you feel about it, the CEO and the C-level doesn't want to go union. So one of the chapters is on what are your rights as a manager?
Yeah.
If they're talking about going union, or what do you do during a strike or a lockout? What's your role and what can you say or not say? And the third chapter is on what happens in a union decertification election where the employees are opting out of a union possibly. And
Right.
what's your role in that too? But this is why I say it's meant to be, leadership in the trenches. If your company's going through M&A activity, you're afraid your job may be eliminated. Okay, let's do a self-exam. Let's do a self-analysis and figure out what our approach is going to be. And then where do you want to go with this? Even if it means losing your job, how do you want to come out on the end of this? And what are you going to do in the steps in the meantime? So I always try and make it as real as I possibly can, because this is real life.
Yeah.
Good or bad, this is what it is.
It's reality. Oh, I got my brother from Florida. He's on there. Hey, Mike, this is Paul's my brother. He's over in Jacksonville, Florida.
Very nice.
Come on.
It's great.
The next part I like, we've talked about this before a couple of times, the employment at will. And I did hear this happening is, you can let people go. You're supposed to be able to let them go at will, but yet HR has you jump through the hoops. And I like those words because I remember somebody saying, well, we can't terminate somebody because HR said so. I'm like, what? We can't terminate because HR said so. But I don't think that's all true altogether, but it's got to be, you have a great chapter in here about that.
Yeah, you know my book, so you know them better than I do. I'm just amazed, Dave. So no, but here's the answer in 30 seconds. The employment at will is what's known as an affirmative defense. When there's two steps to the anatomy of a lawsuit. Step one is the hearing, and step two is the trial. Employment at will is used at the hearing stage, where you're trying to get an immediate dismissal of a case, right? A summary judgment, they call it. It can work, and in some states, maybe 50% of the time, you're going to get an immediate dismissal. In California, most lawyers I've asked will tell you 90+% of the time, you're not going to get a summary dismissal.
Right.
The point is, if it doesn't get resolved at the hearing stage, it goes to step two, which is the trial. At the trial, you can basically forget about employment at will, because now the standard is termination for just cause only. In other words, if it wasn't written down, it never happened. That's usually how it works out. So you got to do both. You don't have a crystal ball. You don't know if it's going to survive summary judgment at the hearing stage. You've got to assume it's going to go to trial, and you'll have to demonstrate cause. So what you do is in step one, have them sign an at-will statement. Have it in your employee handbook. Have it in the employment application. All that stuff. Protect your ability to get a summary dismissal of the case using the employment at will affirmative defense at the hearing stage. But always know you don't know what kind of spin a plaintiff attorney is going to put on this. And if it goes to trial and you don't have any documentation, you are dead in the water. You're going to have to settle outside of court because you can't put it in front of a jury. It's going to cost your company a fortune. So having that discipline protects you at the trial stage. And that's where they don't teach this stuff enough. As soon as the manager understands that, they're like, okay, now I get it. How come they didn't tell me? But it's not HR's HR won't allow me. That's kind of silly. There's a reason HR won't allow you, but the HR people need to tell their managers so that they understand how it works.
Now, I like how you put in here about the Great Depression, the 1930s, employment at will, when that came about how they were saying how when people got hurt, maimed, everything, they would just pull another person because they didn't have to worry. They didn't have that back in the day. World War II it was. I think you put in there was World War II.
Right. So what happened was when we were founded in the 18th century, there was something called the job as property doctrine, which we inherited from the British. We basically said the right to work is a fundamental American right. A company can't take it away arbitrarily without due process. Because of the Great Depression, though, what happened there, Dave, is all of a sudden Congress got together and said, hey, we need to keep capitalism alive. We need to keep these companies going. Let's make the property right the employers. So they could fire at whim. And that is kind of what the law of the land was. So then during World War II, that kind of no one paid attention to it because we were in war. But when people came back, it still existed. And one of the reasons why unions became so strong in the 50s and the 60s was because people didn't want to be employed at whim. They wanted a union contract. The union contract basically gave them job security because it said,
Right.
if you're covered by a union contract, you are not at will. They must show cause. You'll have a chance to save your job because they're going to give you progressive discipline. So people all flocked to the unions, which made sense. But in 1980, that was reversed in a court in California, where basically they said there can be exceptions to employment at will, yada, yada. But nowadays, the plaintiff bar started really in the 1980s, and they're the ones that are adjudicating these cases, and they're going after companies for punitive damages. So really, the plaintiff bar has kind of superseded the unions in terms of job security because companies are all afraid of getting sued.
Well, that's what, when I look back, I've been fortunate to where I've worked in both sides. I was a union, then I was also salary. So I learned a lot. I look back now and say, wow, that was a lot of great training now, because when I first got out of the union, oh, wow, I can get rid of anybody I want now. They don't have a union. You know what? That was a big mistake when I went to a place that didn't. You don't do that.
You can't do that.
That's what I learned for, like, I'm sitting there, wait a minute, if I'm going to let people go because I don't like them, because I wanted to so bad, that it made no sense. But I learned that on my own, to where I love the progressive discipline. I wish they would still do that, because you do it in a union versus even now, but it's the right way to go about it, at least to give that person, like you're saying, or give them that opportunity and let them know. And you have it all in there, your 4 steps to do that, your verbal warning, your written warning, your final, and then termination. Unless it was something for stealing, like you have in here, you put all your stuff like that. That's common sense.
Embezzlement.
But
fraud,
if you follow those guidelines, how much easier that would be.
Very well read, very well understood, my friend. You nailed it. Those are the key issues. So yeah, great.
Yeah, just to get through on there, So I was looking at that, but that was a good thing. Like I said, about the theft and the 3-tier, we talked about that. I want to talk to you about the letter of clarification. That was one I was a little bit trying to figure out. I know you had when you write a document, it all comes down to the documents. Is that what that is?
Yeah, what I basically talk about is sometimes managers have come to me and they've said, Paul, look, I've talked till I'm blue in the face. He or she isn't getting it. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do, but I don't want to discipline for this because it's a fairly minor thing. So the answer logically is put it in writing. When you put it in writing, you can call it a memorandum of understanding, a letter of clarification, a same-day summary of a discussion that you have with someone. But when you put it in writing, people fix it. Once it gets to that level, they're like, ooh, I better do this. Now, it has all of the, these are the issues, these are the expectations, but it doesn't have that language that says, failure to demonstrate immediate and sustained improvement may result in further disciplinary action up to and including dismissal of employment. It's not that. But truthfully, if they don't fix it after that, when you do write them up, you can attach that letter of clarification to the write-up and say, look, we've already talked about this. I gave you an opportunity, and you didn't.
I kind of like that.
So
I just never heard of that word in here. I never heard of that there, and I was like,
yeah, it's an interim step, Dave. It's like I wouldn't do it all the time. You don't want to create a practice that you always have to give someone in writing something before you write them up. But once in a while, in certain circumstances, that could be something that fixes the trick. It's just an additional tool.
It's just an additional. My brother says the paper mill work. I remember those days. He was there with us, so he was on there. But that's the kind of things that we faced as a family back in there. It was just, we all learned together. When you have to write your father up, Paul, that wasn't easy. They had me, get this, my dad wasn't supposed to use a hammer. There was these things they were using to put these things for paper on the rolls, and he used a hammer. He wasn't supposed to. He hurt himself. So the superintendent says, you're gonna have to write your father up. I'm like, come on, Ed, are you serious? My father, I said, Dad, please, beforehand, just play the game. He was pissed off in that meeting, but they made me actually write my father because he was not supposed to use that hammer. I was like, thanks, Ed. I really appreciate that.
Dave, you the man, because I wouldn't have done that. That wouldn't have worked in my. No, there's a good reason why you can't have these days. You can't have family members reporting to one another.
Right.
That's probably one of the top ones.
Yeah, my mom was there too, so I had to write. My mom was there. Our whole family was there out of the military. We were all there, and I'll tell you, those are the days that were always fun because, my dad was on this side, and we'd always have conversations of, and you learned a lot because then when I was in the salary part, wow, did you learn? I was kind of glad I started out on the floor, then worked my way in versus because I knew a lot of stuff that was going on.
Yep.
This next part, you talked about, I like I don't know if a lot of people do anymore, but the paid time off when it comes to progressive discipline. That is that considered like a write-up, or is it kind of just like you're giving that person take a day with pay, sit back, reflect on your job, whether you want to be here. That's the purpose of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's called a day of contemplation or a decision-making leave. I don't want people to hear like, wait, what? I'm not coming up with something totally new under the sun, and it's not something that I've used often, but again, it can be a tool.
Another
When
tool.
you got someone who's in a situation where I did it was someone, I was the HR guy. The manager was telling me of the problem he was having with his employee. The employee was the one who was like, really, my father's the COO. So, if you have a problem with me, maybe you should go through him.
Right.
The manager came back to me and said, I don't know what to do with that. I don't want to lose my job. I said, this is way too much drama. So I said, bring the person in and the three of us will sit and talk. But we gave that young gentleman a letter. And this letter basically said, you need to rethink whether you want to work here.
Right.
The reality is you're threatening to use your father as leverage is not helping anybody. And it's going to hurt you in terms of your credibility with your peers. So tomorrow we're giving you a day off with pay to rethink whether you want to work here or not. And if you decide to resign, we will respect your decision and we'll help you in any way we can in terms of, the transition that you make out of the company. Number two is, however, if you do choose to come back the day after, then since tomorrow is a day I'm paying you for, you need to write me a letter. And that letter needs to talk about how you assume responsibility for the perception you're creating with your peers, how you hold yourself accountable to the highest standards of performance and conduct, blah, blah, blah. And that letter goes in your personnel file because it's a commitment that you're making not only to your manager, but to the company. And it worked. The person came in and was almost in tears. He felt, listen, this is not a day to go to the movies or go to the beach. This is like,
it makes sense the way you put it there, a day reflection. Yeah, you have it in there about saying how they feel.
Yep. And you know what? I called someone on something that was really not going to be it was going to be detrimental to them over their career path anyway, which I'm sure when they ran and told their parent what was going on, the parent probably said, well, you know what? You deserve that.
Right.
I'm guessing that's what happened. The young man never mentioned that to me, that, I did talk to my dad and he said it wasn't that. But at the same time, that person was moved. That person's behavior turned on a dime because I don't think they've ever done it again because they didn't take that as that cockiness, that arrogance, that condescension.
Right. Takes it away.
That's something that can fix those kinds of problems.
And that's why I like how you have in here. There's just different ideas. What I like is because the clarification, the letter, and then this, it gives you some other options. I mean, I understand some of the corporations, bigger ones, it's different versus, but a smaller company really could benefit probably by doing something like that more. In my vision, I'm thinking, wow, you get a company with 25 people or something like that. That would be powerful too, to say, hey, but then again, I look at it, it's like, well, you're no different than anybody else. So I like how you put the word in there and the way you speak to it. And you have a lot of paragraphs that you wrote of, I like how you put different ways of saying it.
The scripting is really important, Dave. It's funny you bring that up, but it's almost like the reason why most managers look the other way and sweep things under the rug, right? It's that path of least resistance is avoidance.
You talk a lot about that. Yep.
Right. And so everything is, they won't talk about it. They won't address it. And all of a sudden some proverbial straw is broken on the camel's back and kaboom. Now they want the person fired and they're in my office.
Yep.
I've learned from that too. I hated being the bad guy. I didn't want to be the one. These are my clients. These are the people I'm supposed to serve. And I had to tell them no early in my career. So what I learned was when I went to a new company, first thing I did was management training. I needed them to understand how I looked at this stuff. And I was able to talk about these kinds of things so they got it. I never had anyone come to me and say, well, we could fire him because he's at will. Because once they had that, that training, they realized how the game worked.
Right.
And they realized why the documentation was so important. And then they would come to me and say, Paul, I need your help. I think we're going to have to move to documentation and I don't want to do it, but I think I have to. And then I can partner with them, or someone on my team could partner with them, whatever it was. But that's really what makes the difference, in my opinion, in good HR, is having that kind of partnership where the clients trust you, the management clients trust you, and they'll come to you, as will the employees.
That makes total sense because, I mean, I would like to have had gone to somebody, say, hey, how do I do this? But that just, I don't know. I just feel again, I like that first time manager. They don't have those tools. And I always feel, listen, I think it's leadership's problem that if they don't give it to them, like when you have like a 90-day, you talk about here, give that 90-day probationary. I still believe that everybody, same concept back then would be, 90 days, you can get rid of them for any reason. You know what I mean? Oh, you don't have to. It shouldn't, I just feel it shouldn't be said like that. You need to provide the tools. If you're not providing that tools to that person that first month, and everybody's saying, well, they're lazy, they're this. Well, did anybody talk to them? Did anybody sit with them and say, and guide them? I guarantee a lot of them don't do that. And I think you could turn around that 90-day pro period, because even if you gave a day off or a letter sent, just because it's 90 days, I mean, that's like employment at will, kind of in a way.
It is. But the funny thing is, in that book and in the other books I've written, Dave, I talk about the importance of onboarding. And this idea is having these structured meetings with new hires at day 30, 60, and 90. And I'm like, okay, here are the questions you want to ask at day 30. Here are the questions you might want to consider asking at day 60. Right. But at day 90, I change it. And the flip is, at day 90, what I talk to the person about is, it's like, okay, we've had these meetings with the onboarding, but I like having a quarterly rhythm. I think it's important. So 90 days from now, I'm going to ask you to do a few things. Number one, put time on my calendar. You can do it now. You don't have to wait till then, but you can do it later on too. So number one, you set the time on my calendar, and number one. Number two, you set the agenda for the meeting. My job is to be there as a leader and a coach. So I want to hear about your professional and career development. I want to hear about where you want additional training. I want to hear about your goals and how you're progressing towards your goals. I want to hear about any problems. I mean, basically, that's a touch base for us, because I do annual reviews 4 times a year, not 1 time a year, but you do all the work.
You really talk about that and hear about that.
Yeah, because they're adults. I'm not going to hold their hands, but at the same time, it's not enough to have a 1 time a year meeting. Because even if I set 30 minutes on the calendar, but I want to hear where they're at. And what I talk to them about is, I want you to think in terms of bullets, not commas. Commas mean I do phones, comma, filing, comma, blah, 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 comma. I'm not interested in that. I want bullets for your resume, for your LinkedIn profile, for your annual self-review, in terms of what are you doing to increase revenue, save costs, save time, increase customer satisfaction. If they're thinking that way, they cut through all the baloney and they get to what their goal is. If they're constantly thinking in the comma mindset of, I'm just doing my job in my job description, that goes nowhere. That's a big wah-wah. So again, you have to create that achievement mindset early on and get them thinking about what those bullets are going to look like. My job as their manager is to help them quantify the bullets. Like, what is it in terms of dollars or percentage of time or increase market share or save costs? I may have to speak to the CFO to put meat on those bones, but I'll do that to help them build out that resume and build out that LinkedIn profile.
And that's part I like. Like I'd say my manager now, my boss now, I've never had a boss that every Friday is one-on-one, 15 minutes. And what I like about it, it's she does it. It's not like, sometimes it's canceled, but not a lot, very little, because I've learned now that one-on-one, wow, that 15 minutes really, it puts it out there. Puts out what's going on. What are you doing? What are you doing here? You talk, but you took that time, versus now I've had bosses, I've never done that one-on-ones before. You talk about it, but you never have it. Until you talk about that a lot in the book, a chapter on there about giving reviews, not waiting to at the end, oh, now you're doing bad, when you haven't written them up, or nothing in your background. And now you talk about even grading them. Some people upgrade people just because they don't want to go that path of resistance. Let's just, let's just make Dave happy. Here we go, Dave, you're doing great. Boom, that's it. Forget it.
Again, you captured it perfectly, Dave. So here's the thought, just 10 seconds. The annual review should not even be considered an annual review. It's like, on Wall Street, you have a 10Q quarterly report every quarter that leads to the 10K annual report. It's the same logic. And realistically, if you're talking about performance throughout the year, when you do your quote unquote annual review, 20% of it should be talking about what happened on the performance over the year. 80% of it should be talking about the future. What are your goals in terms of your career and professional development? What do you want to focus on? How about licensure, certification? What do you want to build? How do you want to move in a new direction? Right now, we are 90% in annual reviews looking backwards. And then they feel judged. And then they feel like, and then the managers are embarrassed. They don't want to get uncomfortable. They want the guy to get a merit increase or a bonus. So they do the grade inflation on the performance review. Then they want to terminate the person. And I, in human resources, have nothing but 5 years of great performance reviews with no progressive discipline. I can't terminate. We'll never survive if this goes to trial. I know it.
Right.
So again, we're backwards on that. And it's not as hard as you think, because managers are like, I don't have the time. And I'm like, you don't have the time not to do this, because it's going to make your life so much easier. It's going to align everything. And you're not doing anything. You're just making the space for the employees to do it. And many of them will actually motivate themselves in the process.
Do you think that's lack of training on their part, though, on managers' part also? Because maybe they're not trained, the reason why. And again, if for everybody that's watching, everything that we've talked about tonight is in this book. And that's why we've hit a lot of subjects. But don't you feel that that's sometimes, if they don't do it like that, that means they're not as trained as much either?
Yes, and that's how I'm trying to change the world.
Right, I know. Right.
My thought is, in the companies where I've worked, we've done this. It works. I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in biotech, I've worked in entertainment, and I've worked in financial services. If it can work in those environments, it could probably work in yours. And my thought would be, again, it's not as hard as you think. You just have to kind of change your sponsoring thought of who you are as a leader and who you choose to be. And if your goal is, I want to manage people and tell them what to do, I'm not the right book. I'm not the right author. If your goal is, I want to create more leaders in turn, I want to become someone's favorite boss, I will hold them accountable to the highest standards, but I want to help them get the traction and the footing they need in their careers to help replace me one day, because that's how I'm going to grow leaders. I want them to be motivated. I've always said, the funny thing to me, Dave, is when you talk to people about their career and their professional development, they don't leave. I've had very little turnover on my teams over the years, because if they feel like what you want for them is their best interest, they're not going to go somewhere else for 20 or 25%.
Right.
Risking the fact that they're going to work for someone who spits fire and throws chairs. They like working for Paul Falcone or whatever. They're going to stay put.
That makes total sense on that. And, another part I love that you put in here, and I got to tell you, man, there's so many in here. I think we could go for 3 hours on this, but I like how you talk about the layoffs, position eliminations, how you talk about it. And it really comes down to the communication and getting it out there. And I don't want to say this. I'm trying to think too, how you put it to where HR is on your side. Naturally, HR is on your team. You need to go to your team to have that trust, because you talk about trust in here. If you need the trust, because you can't do it alone. I think that's what you said. You can't do it alone. You need to go ahead and work with your teams. And that is the only way. And when it comes to, like, especially layoffs and position eliminations, how you put it in here, that is some serious stuff to bring out. And you need to know how to say it, because I'd have to read this over and over, but the way you put it there, I was like, wow, that makes total sense. The wording, what you say.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's like leadership is a team sport. You have to know how to line up your people, right? Your two people are going to be, number one, your manager, and number two, your HR person. So build those relationships. You need to know when to run, not walk, to HR. And a quick example of that is, if there is a termination that happens, what the judge and the arbitrator looks at is, what were your company's past practices? I don't care what it says in your handbook. I know five tardies and the person gets fired. I want to know how you've handled your other ones.
Makes sense, right?
And it's that past practices issue that you cannot know as a manager. The only one who knows that is HR. And they don't talk about it because the privacy issues. You can't have a meeting and talk about, let's talk about how we terminated Paul Falcone yesterday, so all the managers know. It's like, you got to plug into the mama ship. The standard isn't necessarily what's even in the handbook. The standard is, how has your company handled similarly situated employees? That's the standard you're going to be held to in a court of law. And if you don't log in to, plug into HR for that, you're going to be dead in the water, because that inconsistency is what could really turn on the company if it ever gets into the litigation arena. True
that. I can tell you, when I read your paragraphs on that, man, I'm like, man, I wish I could say it like that. But it's not my, I look at it to where you just need to get that training. Again, that's where it comes on me. And what I'm doing here is self-help reading and, learning those certain words that you've used in here. I think that would make the other person even feel better. Because if somebody talked to me that way, you stop and say to yourself, just like you said, you're like, the way you just worded it, it kind of comes back on you pretty easy.
Yeah. And again, like I say, if you can frame things in people's best interests, they're going to listen to it. If you make them feel judged, they're going to react to it. The body language is going to be anger and resentment, and it's all your fault and it's not mine. You need people to assume partial responsibility for any
Right.
problems that are going on. You need to help them raise their level of self-awareness. That's what emotional intelligence is all about. So to the degree that I could in that book, I wanted to bring in all the hot issues for today, whatever they happen to be, because this is real. And we're building that plane, as I said, in real time, and we're flying it. And it's really tough and we're exhausted. But isn't it nice to have, a little bit of a mentor there in your corner, in your pocket, that you can pull out and say, okay, how did you handle this, Paul, when you were involved in this? And what do you recommend? And that's really what the book is about.
And I think that's what you need to do and how you learn. I got two more I'm going to hit you on here about this. Is the one thing, like when you say hot topics, I like how, God, the employee, that's a problem. You could be inheriting them. It's just a total, you avoid them. I've been there. When I was young, I avoided it. I admit it. I didn't want nothing to do with that person. If I could get away with it, I would just stay away. Path of least, going towards that, looking at the person, saying, why didn't I? I look back now and say, why didn't I confront? Because I could have learned more. But in here, you talk about dealing with employees with attitudes. Because one company I was at, I had 2 employees that would complain in the meetings saying their body language. I could just tell it was their body language.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why? So wait a minute, you're both not getting along, but well, it was just the body language. How do you even deal with stuff like that? And this is what I like about it here.
Yeah, when you're talking about mediating employee disputes and all this stuff, the most important word I teach managers in my training classes is the word perception.
Right.
Perception is not right or wrong. It just is. But you can talk to someone about, Paul, listen, from a perception standpoint, this is what it looks like.
Right.
From my standpoint, from my eyes, this is how I see it. And I'm not the only one. And I have to hold you accountable for your own perception management, just like I do myself and everybody else on the team. So as much as you want to sit back and just say it ain't happening, or it's in my mind, or it's, that's not really what's going on here. You need to raise your own expectations.
Right.
In terms of how you're coming across to other people. It's not your intention that matters. It's how it's coming across to them. And that's a problem for you right now. And as your manager, I need to share that with you, because truthfully, I wouldn't be doing you a service as your manager if I didn't, because this is something that can hold you back. And I want you to overcome it. And I want you to conquer it. And I want you to feel confident about knowing how to deal with this in the future.
The one in there, it says about rolling of the eyes. God, I've seen that. And I'm thinking, here you are, 3-4 people, a lot of money in that room right there. And you're talking about rolling of eyes and just the attitude. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, we got other things to talk about. And you're in here about rolling your eyes. And how do you learn besides get aggravated about it? But you need to confront the issue and don't avoid it. I mean, you just have to confront it. And that's what I like about this.
Good. Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. And again, I'm not making them feel judged. I'm just sharing, did you realize that you rolled your eyes and there more than once and did the old harumph and kind of, with the shoulders? I mean, you were kind of in there. I was seeing how frustrated you were with the issue, but is that in your best interest? Is that the way you want to hold yourself when it comes to meetings where you don't necessarily agree with what's going on? So once again, it's kind of putting the manager back into this role of mentor and coach.
Right.
Over and over again, without not this top-down leadership. I'm the manager. I say why, and you have to listen. It's like a gentle hand that guides them to raise their awareness. Now, many do have the ability to make a change, whether it's from a conversation or even if they were disciplined in writing, they can make those changes happen. I've seen that work. Others can't or won't. And if they can't or they won't, I know how to protect the company too with that, because the next meeting we have when this happens is going to be in writing. And I tell them that too, just full transparency. I'm not pulling any punches here. It's like I want them to know what to expect.
Yeah, because I just think it follows on your team. They see it. Your whole team sees it. And that's the other part that, with following some of the guidelines and what you can learn is they're all watching. They're all watching how you deal with this. And the way you do it now is how it's going to be a couple months from now. Then you can only sit back and blame yourself. Because I didn't confront the issue.
And you can only create so much of a motivational environment if you leave that 800-pound gorilla in the room unaddressed. Because everyone is looking at it and says, Paul doesn't hold her accountable like the rest of us. He lets her get away with murder. She's been here for 25 years and she just gets passed from manager to manager to manager. How do you expect them to feel? Now I'm supposed to feel all happy and motivated. It's you have to confront these things, but I call it constructive confrontation. It's not like banging heads. It's just, I'm the manager. Let me share this with you. And I'm hoping you can get there. And I'm willing to have your back to make it safe for you to do so here. So it never holds you back in your career.
Right.
However, my expectations are X, Y, and Z going forward. If you feel like you either can't or you won't be able to meet them, then maybe think about it overnight or come back to me, because we have to have a different discussion. But I'm certainly not going to allow that stuff to go on in my shop. I can't do it. I don't like it. And it is my shop. It's my ecosystem. I get to build it the way I want to build it. So
the way it's going. And no, I agree with that. And I have one more I want to talk about. And like, again, everybody, all the stuff we've talked about tonight, it's in here. And there's another 20. I got 6 hours invested in this. And there are so many, because I can't, you know what it is, Paul? I tell you again, as you can tell, I get flustered about it, is because I wish everybody could have something like this to read. They need to be able, if they're in management, listen, I'm not in it as much right now. I can see why, right? But I've been there. And if I went back into that role, I would do things really a lot differently than I did before, because my problem was I didn't nip it in the butt. It got to me. And then it really tears a new supervisor up. And you need somebody to go to and ask, hey, how do I do this? You know, the rolling of the eyes. Hey, Paul, how do I do this? I'm sick of it. You know, they're the kind of things that you can really learn. But coming to that point, I like how you have in here about, and this is where you must still learn, is all the Gen Z, the baby boomers, the new, you know, the Gen X, and all these different names.
And the millennials, right?
And the millennials, getting them together right now and trying to figure out, wow, the way you have it written in here, it's interesting, because you're like, wow, how do you manage all 4 to 5 different groups into one? And that is one of the things that you talked about.
This is the first time in U.S. history where we've had 5 generations in the workplace at the same time. In my last company, we hired a chief nursing officer who was 78 years old. She wanted to come back to work, and she was certainly qualified. It's like, sure, there's such a scarcity of people in the healthcare space that yes, and it worked out very, very well. But the point is, when you look at an 18-year-old and you think in the same company or in the same department, you can have someone in their, you know, in their mid 70s or, you know, whatever it happens, in late 70s. It's not uncommon now. So it's like, how do we bring them together? And my one piece of advice truly is have a staff meeting, bring in the lunch, and watch a movie called The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway. It is the cutest movie. It is the funniest movie, but it talks about, you know, not to give it away, but a person who is retired who came back as an intern in an organization that was looking for, it was a young Gen Z kind of, or probably a Gen Y. I think they were when they made it, but they needed some elder parenting, so to speak. And it turns out to be, it's a moving kind of film, but it gives everyone something to smile about, but talk about, okay, what can we do here? How did that work? How could that work here for us? What would it look like to bring us together? Now the book says, oh, you can try, you know, 1 through 10 kinds of exercises. There are different exercises, and I get it, right? You can have the young ones teaching everyone about social media and blah, blah, blah. You can have the elder ones talking about what it's like when I was working in terms of what worked best when you were dealing with X, Y, Z. But the truth of the matter is that movie is probably enough in most organizations to get the conversation going, and doing so on a very positive footing. So I recommend it. I really do. I think it's a great tool for that 2 hours or whatever it is that it takes to watch that. Watch it together. Bring in the popcorn. You will really enjoy it.
And put it there, because like you said, when I was reading, I was like, wow, I thought about it. I was like, that is so true, because somebody and people are working to their late 60s now, early 70s. They're still working. And the work ethics were different than they are now. It's just it's reality, and how do you pull all of them together and teach them one, because you all got to follow the same goal. You know, you're going to that same goal, but how everybody is differently. And like you said, that I will say, I always learn from the younger ones about the social media.
So do I, Dave. The funny thing about this is, do you look at the diversity as a source of apartness and otherness? Or do you look at the diversity as a source of strength? And to tell you the truth, the elder generation has so much to share with these younger ones, and the younger ones have a lot to share too. I mean, really, when you talk about Gen Z, the 25 and under, being so isolated because they were at home during COVID, during their, you know, schooling years, and they're the first truly digital generation. They did everything on IMs and texts, but they didn't get to know their friends really, really well because they're not socially oriented. We have to fix this. We have a responsibility as a society to fix it, but the workplace is actually a really good place to do that with coaching and mentoring. So again, there's a lot of positive there depending on how you look at it.
It is, and I agree. So, Paul, I want to thank you. I mean, wow, we hit an hour. I figured it'd go an hour, and I don't even think I got through half of the book. But everybody, listen, the first-time manager crisis, leading through crisis, there's 20 more chapters, and everything that I talked about tonight that we did. I mean, there's even managing bullies. There's every single thing a frontline supervisor. I would love to pass this out because it just gives them like, wow, I've been there. I've done that. And then when you put that option there, and a lot of it, I would say that your books teach me is, there's other ways of saying it. There's other ways. And it comes down to that communication, how you come across. I mean, that's what I've learned through all these things. But I want to give you this time, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself again, and everybody check out on Paul's on LinkedIn and all these great books. I'm telling you, you can't go wrong.
Thanks, Dave. That's really, really nice. If anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm at Paul Falcone 1. So easy enough. I'd be happy to accept your connection and stay connected that way too.
Yeah. And then we got, again, I know I just want to put this out here again. What I want to show everybody again is the new book is coming out. And this time I'm going to have it right here. It is. The new book's coming out May 21st, First Time Manager for HR. And you want to talk about that again, Paul, real quick?
Just real quick. The funny thing, Dave, is the first book I've ever written for an HR audience, and it was hard. Usually my books have 4 to 6 people that I thank in the acknowledgement section to say, they're the subject matter experts in the space. They're oftentimes labor attorneys, whatever. I needed 26 people for this book, for the new book. I've never had that many subject matter experts, but I needed it. It is so diverse when you think about, when I was doing an international HR over a decade ago, it's changed. Immigration has changed. All of these different things. It's like, I need specialists now to talk about the comp, the benefits, what's happening in the training space. What are we doing in terms of talent management these days? You can't do it all as one person. So you need to rely on people. I have an HR department of one, public sector HR, M&A HR. I mean, I really tried to pull it all in so everyone can get a little bit of a taste for the full palette of what's going on out there in the HR space these days. But it was meant to, speed up the onboarding process and get you really more familiar, more fluent with the terminology and everything else. So it was a challenge to write. You would think after 30 years of HR, it would have been my easiest book. It was not by any means.
So, that's what I said. The ideas that you come up with here, like I said, and this is so early. You still have so many more to come. I bet, I guarantee. And it's just overall, I can imagine how you learn from writing these books alone.
Correct. I mean, there's always that saying that says, "Teach what you choose to learn." And so it's teaching it that I realize what the questions are that the students have that leads me to writing it and researching it and all, that kind of stuff. That's really been the formula that fueled my writing over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, my wife doesn't care that I'm buying books on Amazon. When she sees it from yours, she's like, all right, doesn't say anything. I got the 10 of them, or I got 10. Yeah. So I'm thinking, well, right there is a mortgage right there. So we'll sit there and say, and she goes, but she knows I enjoy them and I read them, and that's the fun thing about it. Because I like to learn a lot. And another one I just want to give a plug is, this was my favorite one. The 96 great interview questions for everybody is, you got to get this. It really, I like, because it gives me different ideas to ask a question. There's a lot of questions in here that I don't think a lot of people would ever even think of asking. And then how you put the reasons behind it and what you can expect. You give 2 different scenarios of what that person can say. But that's one of my other favorites there. But again, Paul, I want to thank you. And I know I'm going to be back here talking about that other book.
I can't wait. You are the funnest, most interesting podcast. I love interviewing with you. You are absolutely wonderful, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll be right after this video. We'll talk to you, Paul. I'll be right back.
Okay, sounds good. We'll talk soon.